So many of you have asked me for a resource about structuring an essay, and I hope that this resource is at least a good starting point for structuring your essays. There is lots of information out there, much of it is a Google away, so please don't hesitate to embellish what you learn today with that further information. Essentially, an essay, if colour-coded, would look something like this. As you can see, the black is general material. Red, blue and yellow are the three topics or the three main paragraphs of your essay, and the blended colours are what links those sentences together. You'll see here, this is a blended area and this is a blended area. So you'll notice that the introduction, which would be this top part here, talks about the three topics you're going to cover, and this is generally saying what you are going to do, i.e. you're going to write an essay exploring whatever the three topics are. Then you go into detail about those three areas and you conclude it with clear influence on your 3 points, or 2 points in this case, with linking sentences, etc. We'll come back to this at the end of the PowerPoint so that you better understand how you might use this. But essentially, ideally, your essay will look like this once colour-coded. In order to make sure that you can therefore colour code, you may start by answering subheadings to structure your essay. But you must remember to remove the subheadings at the end so that there is a fluency to the reading. You may choose to replace them with topic sentences and linking sentences, which is where those blended colours came in the previous slide. You also want to add connectives where appropriate, and if you're unsure, please ask about what that means. So this is a very basic essay breakdown. Using subheadings to begin with, you would start with your introduction, but actually I would make sure I wrote my introduction last, and I'll explain why in a moment. Then you have your main paragraph 1, main paragraph 2, main paragraph 3, conclude all your findings. If, for example, you were analysing something, you would make sure you had 2 paragraphs in your essay that showed your own view and 1 paragraph that suggested an opposing view. But that isn't necessary for all the essays that you're writing. Usually those essays are question-based and they're looking at perhaps an existing theory or an existing practitioner. So certainly if you're new in the course, you'll be looking at introduction, main paragraph 1, 2, 3 and a conclusion. The reason why I would wait to write my introduction is because my introduction invites the reader to understand what I'm going to talk about in my paragraph 1, 2, 3 and indeed conclude. I may have a plan of what I want to discuss, but find that my research doesn't define in the same way that I would have done if I had an introduction at the beginning that I had written first. Remember, the reader has no idea of what order you've written these paragraphs in, as long as they're structured well. So let's talk about paragraphs in particular. Usually a paragraph will start with a topic sentence. It's like an introduction to what we're going to say later. Then you'll give an example illustrating the point or the topic sentence that you started with. You're going to give some kind of illustration that supports that example, and then you are going to link to the next paragraph or essentially close that paragraph. You can remember this by thinking P-E-E-L, peel. Make your point, which is your topic sentence, explain that point, give evidence or an example of it, and then link it. Here's an example of where you can see this has been done, and the marker is highlighted where it's been done. So this is an essay about an argument for vegetarianism. I'm just going to take you through the first paragraph. Slavery has stopped. Women have been emancipated. Apartheid, in all its human forms, has been roundly condemned, but the abuse of animals has accelerated. One of the most obvious reasons for the abuse of animals in modern society is intensive farming. That's your point, your topic sentence. Intensive farming causes severe stress to animals. You're explaining the point. Intensively farmed chickens, for example, are forced to grow abnormally proportioned bodies at an unnatural speed by being pumped full of growth hormones and calories. The birds live in squalid, overcrowded conditions where they attack and mutilate each other through stress and cannot support the weight of their overdeveloped bodies on their underdeveloped legs. After a few weeks, machines execute them. There's your example. It is a vicious life and a cruel death. You're linking that back for obvious reasons why it shouldn't happen, and particularly at the top, the abuse has been accelerated. When I'm saying at the top, I'm talking of this sentence here. This same pattern is repeated in the second paragraph, so don't feel like you have to change it up. P-E-E-P-E-E-L happens in that order for all the paragraphs. So the point of this paragraph, some people might argue that farming animals for food is instrumentally wrong, but not intrinsically wrong. Point made. By this, they mean that intensive farming methods are wrong, but if we were to give animals happy, healthy lives and quick, painless deaths, then eating meat is justifiable. You're explaining your point. Eating ethically produced, free-range and organic meat is acceptable to some people because it can be seen as creating the best outcome for humans whilst reducing the cruel treatment of animals. This is known as utilitarian argument. Linking it back. Now, in this example, hopefully you've spotted it's different to the one above because it hasn't given a specific example in its explanation. In the final paragraph we look at here, we see it shift around a little bit because what the writer has done is linked the first two paragraphs to this third paragraph. And you may find you do this, particularly if you're doing an analytical document. There are two problems with this position. There's your link to the above. The first is that it is a minority view. There's your point. The reality is that many people would prefer to eat ethically produced meat, but see it as a luxury they cannot afford, so they rely on intensively farmed meat. There's your explanation. This problem remains and is likely to escalate. Example. Rising food prices due to factors such as limited land, rising populations and supermarket dominance, example, all mean increasing pressure to reduce prices through intensive methods. Intensive farming is not going to go away. We link again. So you can see how there is a through line of thought for each paragraph. It's linear, it makes sense, it's fluent, but it is keeping to that idea of make a point, explain your point, give an example, make the link. So we write our paragraphs, possibly on Word or some other word processing document. And then what you can do is use this color coding to identify and be honest with yourself where you have made general statements, where you've covered particular topics, and where you're blending and linking the topics together. You may, if you're particularly savvy or somebody who finds it difficult to refine your arguments down or to synthesize information, you may choose to pick another color. And that color you're identifying where you might be going off on a tangent or it might be irrelevant information. Alternatively, you could leave it blank. Then, when you've color coded your entire essay, have a look at it. Are there blocks and chunks of colour where you're stipulating in detail particular points? Or is it an absolute collage of colour all over the place? That would denote that perhaps you haven't been very clear and linear about your thought process. Are there big chunks of text that aren't coloured in? And you can ask yourself, how relevant is that? Is there a hell of a lot of black in there that actually is far too generalised and not specific enough? You might find that for topic 1 and 2, in this case, the red and the blue sections, are very large and thick, but your third colouring of yellow actually is very thin, and this is an area that you may need to fill gaps in to provide more context. Once you've done that, you need to check your quality of written work. That's what I deem as QWC. And we're thinking in that sense about how you write your paragraphs regarding grammar and punctuation. There is loads of information out there to help you with this, but some of the quick things to consider that people often have a problem with. So problems with nouns. For example, knowing when to put a capital on a noun can be problematic. Common nouns do not need a capital letter, and proper nouns do. Proper nouns are the individual names of things, places, or people. Common nouns are the names of general terms. A pronoun can replace a noun in a sentence to avoid repetition, and this is where you perhaps might gain that feedback if you ask somebody else to proofread your work. Verbs can be an issue. They can arise in choosing whether to use a passive voice or an active voice. For an example, an active voice is when the subject of the sentence performs the action. For example, I researched all the books on Maslow's theory. A passive voice is all of the books on Maslow's theory were researched. You might find there are problems with adjectives and adverbs. You know, when we're at school, we're often encouraged to use adjectives and adverbs to make our writing more interesting. An adjective, for those of you that aren't aware, describes a noun, and an adverb describes how the action of a verb is performed. When using adjectives and adverbs for academic purposes, make sure they make the writing more precise, not more interesting. This is academic writing you're doing right now. You should avoid superlatives. Superlatives is the highest degree of something, the biggest, the best, the greatest, the most complicated. Unless you know for sure what you're talking about can be quantified in that manner. Think about your sentences as well. At an academic level, you're not expected merely to write in simple sentences. You need to put ideas together, link them together, show the relationship between them. Every sentence contains at least one main clause. A main clause can stand on its own or as part of complex or compound sentences. If you need to research that more, I've got a great book for you. Just let me know. Think about your spelling. Don't rely on the spell checker on Word to do it for you. It may not necessarily differentiate between between two, and two. You may get blue squiggly lines and just click and take the first option, but you must proofread it through to make sure that what the computer has identified is the right option for you. Sometimes spelling can be an issue and prevent the fluency of what you're trying to say, and therefore the reader, assessor or marker can struggle to understand your point, and that will only hold the writing back. Of course, in this, you always want to make sure you're referencing. Please use Harvard referencing and look at the resource that you've been offered about how to Harvard reference.